a bandit.
Let's talk a little bit about the movie Smokey and the Bandit. Smokey and the Bandit came out in the late 70s. I wouldn't say it was the beginning of Burt Reynolds' fame, but it came pretty much at the pinnacle of Burt Reynolds' fame. But there's so much more to that movie than just Burt Reynolds. There's so much going on, a lot of fun, like a lot of other movies that come out. The supporting cast is so important. Burt Reynolds was important, but it was also very important to have the chemistry between Burt Reynolds and Sally Field. And of course, you can never underestimate the role of Jackie Gleason as Sheriff Buford Justice in that movie, which is always a great part of it. This movie came out, and as I said, it was about at the time of the pinnacle of Burt Reynolds' famous part. He eventually had movies soon after. He had movies like Cannonball Run and Hooper, which were kind of in the same vein. Cannonball Run was very much in the same vein. Hooper was the same kind of characters that he was playing. And I just remember seeing these movies in the theater growing up, and we thought it was funny because I was 10, 11, 12 years old. These movies are the same kind of jokes and the same kind of PG rated swearing that's going on in there. My dad thought it was funny, and so we got to go watch them. But I think about Smokey and the Bandit, and I still watch Smokey and the Bandit today when it's on reruns on TV, because there are such great parts, and I can still, Jackie Gleason, put the evidence in the car.
Put the evidence in the car.
And that's so good. I start, now that I'm older, I start thinking about that movie, and God, that doesn't make sense. There's a lot of that movie that I just don't understand once I start thinking about it. And this is what happens. I'm not thinking about it, I'm tending to overthink it. So we're going to spend this time in this video and we're going to overthink Smokey and the Bandit and figure out, does this make any sense at all? Aside from the fact it's funny, but it doesn't make any sense. And so that's the topic of this video. Let's dive in and see what we can do to overthink Smokey and the Bandit.
If you're not aware of Smokey and the Bandit, the movie, this is going to be kind of hard for you to follow, but let me just give you a quick summary. The way the story works is that Bandit Bo Darvel, played by Burt Reynolds, makes a deal with Big and Enos Burdett, played by Pat Harrington and Paul Williams. And what he's going to do is he's going to drive to Texarkana, Texas, pick up a load of Coors beer and bring it back to Atlanta, and he has to do that within 28 hours. In order to do this, Bandit enlists the assistance of his friend Cletus Snow, also known as Snowman, and Snowman is a pet dog named Fred. So what they do is that the way it's going to work is that Snowman is driving the truck and Bandit is driving the black Trans Am, which is going to block for the truck to try to distract the authorities to away from the truck so that the truck can make good time in driving from Atlanta to Texarkana and back. Along the way, Bandit picks up a guest whose name is Carrie, played by Sally Field. Ultimately, she ends up with the handle being a frog. Carrie joins the party because she was set to marry Junior Justice, who was the son of the Sheriff Buford T. Justice of Texas. And Carrie left Junior at the altar, danced down the aisle, and ultimately met Bandit on the highway. He picked her up, and she joined the trail the rest of the way. Another big character in this in the movie is, of course, the CB radio. This came out in 1978-ish, and that was the height of the CB craze. And in fact, Carrie tells Bandit that she's part of this CB radio show of some sort. So that's all what's going on in the movie Bandit. So the key is go from Atlanta to Texas, pick up 400 cases of Coors beer, and bring them back for Big and Little Anus Burdette because they're thirsty, and they have to do that in 28 hours. So let's think about what's happening.
We're just going to run over to Texarkana and pick up 400 cases of Coors and bring them back in 28 hours.
Whoa, I got a flash for you.
That's called bootlegging, and that's against the law.
So the question is, before we start, what's the big idea about going to Texarkana, Texas to get 400 cases of Coors beer? In the movie, we're told that, actually early on, that we learned that trucking Coors east of Texas is bootlegging. Is that true? And in fact, it is true. So Big Anus and Burdette offered Bandit and Snowman $80,000, the cost of a new semi-rig back in 1978, to go to Texarkana, Texas to get 400 cases and bring it back 24 hours. In fact, back in 1978, taking Coors outside the selected states near Colorado was illegal. So bringing it east of Texas was considered illegal transportation of beer and was absolutely considered bootlegging. So that part of the story is absolutely true. All right, so let's talk about the trip. So what they need to do is they need to leave Atlanta, Georgia, and they need to come over here to Texarkana, Texas, which is essentially straight west of Georgia. And it's about 650 miles, depending on which MapQuest or Google Maps that you're going to use. And so you could do something like this. We don't actually get to see the actual route that they used in the during the movie, but there are some hints along the way. So we know that they go through a lot of small towns along the way, especially on the westbound trip, that they go through small towns. They're on a lot of back roads and things like that. And so the most direct route from Atlanta to Texarkana, according to MapQuest, is to take this route here via Birmingham, Tuscaloosa. So they go through Alabama, they go through Mississippi, then through Arkansas, and straight over to Texarkana. In the movie, we have references to all of those. They are in Alabama, they go through Mississippi, and they are in Arkansas, and before they end up in Texarkana, Texas. And so that's a normal route to do that. So they have 28 hours to make this trip, round trip. How long does it take to get there? Well, according to MapQuest, if you take that route from Atlanta to Texarkana, that takes about 11 hours. All right? And you think about it, that's not so bad, actually, because 11 hours round trip, that's 22 hours. That means that they've got 6 hours to spare in their trip. So that sounds like something that's very doable. So that's my initial response. But in fact, that's not necessarily the best way to do it, because they're taking all these back roads, and what we would do today is we'd take the interstate. And so, for example, we could take I-20, and if you take I-20 through Louisiana and go through Monroe and Shreveport, Louisiana, up to Texas, up to Texarkana, it's actually, according to Google Maps, it's more like 10 hours. So you can actually do this in about a 10-hour trip, and that's because you can get on the interstate and fly, and you don't have to go through all these small towns. In fact, the shortest way to do this is to come up on I-22 up through Memphis, down through Little Rock, and over to Texarkana. You can actually do this on a good day that I've seen in Google Maps. It's more like 9 hours and 45 minutes, depending on the construction. Sometimes it gets a little longer than that, but I've seen it as short as 9 hours, 45 minutes. And so you can actually make this trip one way in today's traffic using, this isn't even Waze, and so it's not even that faster, much faster. You can make that trip one way in less than 10 hours. So it seems like you should be able to do Atlanta, Texarkana, and back in 28 hours. Shouldn't be much of a problem. So here's what I got from when I did this on Google Map, and you can see what it's doing is actually dropping me down south. Instead of going up north through Memphis on this one, it's actually sending me down south via through Louisiana. But here's the key to it. The current trip is like, once so all this stuff here is all about what's going on in Atlanta, but and so this is, I don't know where the Atlanta Fairgrounds is, but this is within a half mile. You pick up the exit onto the I-20 ramp, and you go and you stay on I-20 and you go 60 miles here, and this is all 600 miles on I-20 going west until the very end, which you end up in Texarkana. And so we're going all this up here, I-49 and everything that's up in that direction. So we're all going toward Texarkana, and only about the last 10 miles or so are off of the interstate. So I don't know where the fairgrounds are in Atlanta, where they actually started this, but they actually went, so just, a couple miles. But in Atlanta, you pick up the interstate, and you take the interstate the whole way. Now, in the movie, they certainly didn't do that, because we know, for example, on the westbound trip in the middle of the night that Bandit is driving through some small town because he eludes a police officer downtown, hides behind a building, and then breaks the fourth wall, and then drives on and things like that. And so we know that they actually took a route through that. So that could affect it. But at the same time, even then, we shouldn't be talking much more than 11 hours one way or the other. All right? Just something that's going to be worth thinking about is what happens when they get to Texarkana. So now Texarkana is a city that's split between the Arkansas side and the Texas side. And presumably they got over to Texarkana, Texas, and so they came up, according to the map that I have here, they come up I-49, or you could come in I-30. I just got some random location here in Texarkana, Texas. So according to the map I showed you, you would come up this way. This is the Texas side. This is the Arkansas side. And this is important because notice that from here all the way up to there is maybe 8 miles or something like that. So on this trip, that the 670-mile trip from Atlanta to Texarkana, Texas, only about 8 miles of it, the last 8 miles of it, is in Texas. And so we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. And the reason is because I mentioned that they pick up Carrie, a.k.a. Frog, and they meet Sheriff Justice first shows up in Texas, and that must happen somewhere in Texas. So there's not a lot of time for that to happen. So we can really pinpoint exactly where, pretty close to where that all happens. So let's talk about the timing of the trip, all right? So the first thing we're going to ask is, can this round trip be completed in 28 hours? And I think the answer is clearly yes. If the one-way trip is only 10 to 11 hours today, it's clear that this round trip could be done in 28 hours, even with plenty of time to spare. And so we think that we should be able to do that. But there are some issues. So let's think about what those issues might be. So first of all, the 10 to 11 hour drive one way doesn't include stops that are along the way. So for example, we know it takes some time to load some beer into the truck, all right? And so we got to figure out how much time it's going to take to do that. We know that they needed 400 cases of Coors, and they could load that onto the truck because they found a forklift. And so they could take it one pallet at a time and load it in there. I don't know how many cases are in a pallet. I tried to look this up, and so I see pictures that kind of look like this, and it looks like that's a pallet. I'm just saying there's 1, 2, 3, there's 20 cases on that pallet. I don't know, maybe there's 40 total, but I'm going to say that pallet has 20 cases. That's only 20 forklift trips. Right? If it only takes a minute either way, that's that's only 20 minutes. That's going to take them to load the truck, and that's really good. So even if even if it takes, we'll be very conservative, and we'll take it an hour. That still leaves plenty of time to make that trip. They had to stop for food, gas, and probably for bathroom breaks. So they had to do a 10-100, and Frog says it's better than a 10-200. And so I looked it up, and a 77 Trans Am, which is probably something very similar to what he was driving, he might have had a 78, was rated at about 15 miles per gallon for city and 18 miles per gallon for country. But he was driving hard, so not at optimal efficiency. So let's call that 15 miles per gallon. He has a 20-gallon tank, which is what is actually the standard on a 77 Trans Am for 1,400-mile round trip. That'd take 93 gallons, and so he'd have to fill up with gas 4 times at about 8 minutes per stop. That's an extra half hour. They can go to the bathroom while they're filling and things like that. Along the way, we know that Bandit and Frog stopped at some secluded area for a short rendezvous. But that really doesn't matter because they're waiting for Snowman. They were ahead of him, and so he was trying to catch up. Why was the Snowman so far behind? Well, he had to fill up with gas as well, and I don't know a lot about semis and things like that. I know they have very big tanks, and but he filled up for at least once, and so he did that, and he got some takeout food, and where he got beat up in a bar fight, but it didn't last too long. He also called home. And then they stopped at one point, and they got out to stretch their legs, and Fred jumped in the lake. So, but how long did he take? Even if we give him 2 hours for his fight and to get this food and get in the fight, he's filling up with gas at that time at that truck stop. He had, give him 2 hours to chase after Fred, and give him another half hour for bathroom breaks. He still have time to make this route in 28 hours. So it's getting closer to 28, but there's no reason to think that it should be all that more than 28, and that 28 should even be that difficult given the speeds that they were going. One of the issues that's not exactly clear in the movie is, that they had 28 hours to go to Texarkana and back in order to get 400 cases of Coors. But when did that 28 hours start? And this is the part I've been really struggling to try to figure it out. So, in principle, it could have started as soon as Bandit and Big Anus Burdette shook hands and agreed upon it. And if that happens, that's a big change, because there's a lot of things that had to happen after that point. So first of all, for example, Bandit had to buy a new Trans Am. He makes it very clear that when he's making the deal with Burdette, that Little Anus Burdette gives him money to buy a new car.
New car? I gotta have a new car to block for the truck, Okay, go ahead, boy. Speedy car. Speedier than that.
So he went out and bought himself a new Trans Am. Little Anus gave Bandit all the cash he had on him, started handing him $100 bills. And you can see in his hand, this is a clip from the movie, there's big Little Anus counting his money, and he's got a stack of $100 bills. So he gave him all the cash that he had on him. We know that he got pretty much a new car, because when he picked up Frog, you can see they showed this speedometer, the odometer, and there's 1,100 miles on the car. This was at the time that they were in Texas, so that he had driven about 700 miles by that point. So that means that the car only had about 400 miles on it when they got it. So it was a pretty new car at that point, all right? But Little Anus gave him the money, and Bandit had to go to a car dealer to buy the car. So he took the cash that Little Anus gave him, went to a car dealer, bought the car. In order to get there, he presumably drove his semi over, because then he put the car in the back of the semi and drove over to Cletus Snow's house and to get Cletus out of bed, and then they could get on the road. I forgot to put in here, actually, at some point they actually needed to get a license of some sort, at least have a license plate, because the Trans Am actually has an individual license plate. Band 1 is the name on the license plate. It's not like you could steal this from the semi or anything like that. So this car actually was licensed in some way. So had a registration of some sort. So when did he get that all done? Got it in, made the deal somewhere in the afternoon, went out to the dealer and got a personalized license plate. That's actually getting pretty good. But if this all activities counted toward that 28 hours, it's going to make it a lot harder, because I can't imagine how many hours would it take to go to a car dealer, buy a Trans Am on the spot, didn't have to test drive or anything like that, give the guy some cash and get out of there, and then get over to Cletus's house, get him up out of bed, and then get him on the road, put some deodorant under his arm so they can get on the road. So if that counted towards the timeline, it gets really challenging at that point.
Oh, go, girl, go!
I'm going. I got the metal to the pedal and the thing to the floor.
So in thinking about the timing that we've seen One of the assumptions is that I use the Google Maps today, and the Google Maps today is going to use the speeds that we drive today, which obviously are a lot faster than they drove back in 1977. So back in 1977, the speed limit on all the roads, including the interstates, was going to be 55 miles per hour. And so in that respect, if you think about it, there's not actually that much of an advantage of taking the interstate. Today we can take the interstate and go 70 plus, and that's a lot better than taking the back roads unless you're in Texas, but they didn't do that much in Texas. And so the main advantage of taking the interstate is just to avoid all those intersections and going through those small towns and things like that. So that's actually all right. I remember growing up that we used to average, when we talked about drive time in back roads and things like that, we usually estimated an average speed of 50 miles an hour. So if you had 150 miles to go, it would take 3 hours, and that worked pretty well. So for 670 miles, that means we'd have an estimated drive time of about 13 hours. And so now all of a sudden that trip from Atlanta to Texarkana, 670 miles, seems a lot longer than we would have than we would take today. So it's longer than this 11 hours or whatever that Google Maps is saying. It's more like 13 hours. That's what they would expect taking those back roads. But that's assuming that they're averaging 50 miles an hour and at a 55-mile speed limit. But they're going a lot faster than 55 miles an hour, right?
Are we really going 110? We're going 110.
Well, yes, they were going faster than 55, but sorry, Frog, or we're not going 110, right? Here's the speedometer that is shown in the scene when she does that, and you can see right there it says 110, but that's on the inside, so that's actually kilometers per hour. And so in fact they're only going, not even going 70. He wasn't actually going all that fast. Way to go there, Frog. Yeah, so how do you expect to do it so fast? So maybe the time is a little bit longer than 11 hours. Maybe it's more like 12 hours because they're not even going 70 miles an hour. Yeah. Oh, by the way, it's worth noting that at that point there was 1,100 miles on the car, so they had gone from Atlanta to Texarkana, and we're starting their way back, and there's 1,100 miles on the car, so it's about 700 miles. Assume that. So apparently he started with about 400 miles on the black Trans Am. On the other hand, I can't say we're actually going that slow, because at one point, later on, when Snowman gets pulled over by the Evil Knievel, that was it. That was then their Evil Knievel pulled them over. He told him that he was going more than 90 miles an hour. He had buried the needle on his truck, is what it is, and so he didn't even know that truck could go that fast. So he was going more than 90 miles an hour, and so that sounds a lot more realistic for this type of a drive. And this was on the interstate, though, so he was on the interstate going 90 miles an hour, really flying along, and I think that was on the interstate. Well, whatever, it was an open road. So there it was, and so they were driving really fast. And so these estimates by using Google Maps from today are pretty realistic in that respect. And I think we can say 10 to 11 hours is going to be a good time. You could do it in Waze. Maybe Waze would even give you a shorter time in that respect. I'm still stuck on this timeline thing. I really am. I don't know how we can actually assess it. All indications are it was light out when they left. Okay, Bandit got over to Cletus's house. It was daylight. He pulled him out of bed. It was still daylight. Back the car out of the truck. It was daylight. If they didn't leave then, what in the world were they doing? Because I mean, this is all ready to go. And if this is summer, it's got to be before 9 p.m. Sunset in Atlanta in the middle of summer is around 8:30, something like that. So still dusk time is around 9 p.m. at the latest, and so we can't say anything like that. We know their westbound trip was overnight, and they arrived in Texarkana at the beer place in the daylight, so they couldn't have arrived much before 5 o'clock in the morning. And I think actually that's actually very generous estimate as well, based on sunrise in Texarkana. If it took them 12 hours to drive, that means that they would need, actually this is 12 hours, it means they need to leave at 5 p.m. If that's the case, but on the other hand, Cletus also says they're well ahead of schedule at that point, or they're ahead of schedule at that point. When they arrive back in Atlanta, the sun could be going down because there's some long shadows, but it's not that low in the sky. Maybe it's late afternoon or evening. So here's a picture of from when they arrived back in Atlanta, and you can see like the shadows on this picnic basket and that, and you can see the sun's not too much above that the tree line there. It looks like the sun is coming there. So I think that it could be early evening, late afternoon, early evening, maybe 6 o'clock or something like that. Then that would be consistent with them leaving Texarkana at 7 o'clock in the morning or something like that. So I wonder about that. So that's consistent with that. With leaving Texarkana at 7, if they took 11 hours to get back to Atlanta, that would make it 6 o'clock. And then if you go 11 hours before then, so 11 hours before 6 in the morning makes it 7 o'clock at night that they left, which means I guess he had all afternoon in order to do that. So let's think about the schedule. So Cletus says that they're ahead of schedule when they get to Texarkana. So what does that mean? They get to Texarkana at the halfway point, which is about 14 hours. If we think about it that way. So maybe the schedule is get to Texarkana at 14 hours and then come back. And so if it's get to Texarkana at 14 hours, they're 20 minutes ahead of schedule, so 13 and a half hours. That would give them 14 and a half hours to get back to Atlanta. But if they got to Texarkana at 5 a.m., they'd have to be back to Atlanta by 8 p.m. And if that's the question, why did it take so long to get back to Texarkana? In 77, they could have got back to Texarkana easily without even speeding, because they had 13 hours to get back to Texarkana. So it wouldn't take 14 and a half hours to get back. That wouldn't be a problem at all. Maybe that schedule is based on the time they left. And so if the clock started at 2 and they left at 6, then they'd have 12 hours for each leg. And so that means if they're 30 minutes ahead of schedule, when they reached Texarkana, they get there with, they have them there with about 12 and a half minutes left. So maybe that's kind of where it is. So let's think about the timeline again. So they're going to arrive in Atlanta at 6 o'clock. They're going to leave Texarkana at 6 a.m. That would be a 12-hour drive. That means that they arrive in Texarkana at 5 a.m., which means that they had to leave Atlanta at 6 p.m., and that's giving me 11 hours because they're ahead of schedule. And so that means that there's a 4-hour window between when the clock started and when they left Atlanta. So in this time, what we're going to say is that this is the time he's got to buy a car and pick up Cletus. I gave him a total time of an hour in Texas and go from there. But then that's a problem. So this timeline might work out. You could say, maybe you could contract or scrunch up some of the times here. Maybe it's a little later. Maybe it's 7 a.m. and they only took 11 hours to get back. Or if they're really going fast, it's 8 a.m. and 10 hours to get back. But then you've really got a lot of worry about how much time is going over here, and particularly what time they left at night. The big problem that they have is that they drove overnight and they arrived in daylight. So what time did they leave? What time did they get there? I'm giving them 5 o'clock that they got there at the earliest, because they had to drive all night. They left when it was light, so that means before 9 o'clock. They arrived when it was light, which means after 5 o'clock. So that's a block that we can't get around. But then there's a problem. Okay, so they end up Bandit picks up Carrie on the side of the road as he was leaving Texarkana. And we know that we're still in Texas because Carrie was marrying Junior, who's the son of a Texas county sheriff, and the wedding was being held in Sheriff Justice's hometown because he decorated the whole town at a cost of $40. And so we know that was being held in her hometown. So the wedding was being held in Texas. We know that Carrie left Junior at the altar because she was dancing down the aisle as she left. All indications is that she was still in Texas when he picked her up, because the Texas sheriff came across the spot, the boys, and where they were, she got picked up. The Texas Buford Justice came across the boys there, and they told him that she went with the bandit. And so this was all going on in Texas. So remember the map of Texas. Texarkana is right on the border of Texas. So there's only about 8 miles from the northwest side of Texarkana to the southeast corner that they could be going, and that could be the road. And so that's a big question. So that's the important part. So Carrie was there after the wedding and everything like that. If they left Texarkana, remember our timeline, they left Texarkana between about 6 o'clock, maybe 7 o'clock, maybe 8 o'clock even. Why would she be standing on the highway at 6 in the morning if she just left Junior at the altar? And it's not like she left the night before, because she's still in her wedding dress and Junior was still in his wedding clothes. So it's not like they had time to change or anything like that. That just doesn't make sense. At best, you got to put her there. If we're going to try to get a timeline, assume there was an early wedding, and let's say it's 10 o'clock in the morning. And so maybe she's on the road by 10:30. If they could average 75 miles an hour, that would get them there in about 9 hours, and they get to 11 by 7:30. It's not clear that that's consistent with the shadows, but let's be generous. If they arrived at 7:30, that meant that the clock started at 3:30 the day before. Okay, that would be your 28-hour clock. So Bandit picks up Frog at 10:30 and he's leaving Texarkana. That means they got to Texarkana by maybe 9 o'clock. I'm going to expand the time, give them more time to load. And so if they got to Texarkana at 9 o'clock, then you have to ask the question, why did it take them so long to get there? If they take 10 hours to get to Texarkana, they were ahead of schedule. Remember, when they got to Texarkana, they're ahead of schedule. The clock started at 3:30. What time would they had to leave? If we give them a 10-hour drive, they left Atlanta at 11 o'clock. And so if they got to Texarkana at 9, it would have taken them 12 hours. If they left Atlanta at 9 o'clock, it took them 12 hours. If they left at Texarkana to 9 o'clock, that gave them 10 hours to get home by 7:30 or 10:30. They left at Texarkana at 10:30, got home at 7:30. If they left Atlanta at 9 p.m., that means they got to Texarkana at 9 a.m. That would be 12 hours. And so if they left at 9, let's call it 9:30, that means that they have until 6:30 the next day. So that means that they have 10 and a half hours, 21 hours to make the driving trip. But he says they were ahead of schedule, so they couldn't have taken 12 hours to get to Texarkana. So if they actually were ahead of schedule, that means that they would have had to leave Atlanta way back at 11 o'clock, and it was dark. It was still daylight when Bandit picked up Snowman. So what in the world were they doing between that time when he picked up Snowman and before they left? If you are on a race against time, you pick up Snowman, what are you going to do? Sit around and go to dinner? No, you're going to get on the road and go. So I just don't see it working. So in the end, the time for the trip will depend on how fast Snowman can drive the truck. Because this is what it is. It's about going to Texarkana, getting the beer, and bringing it back to Atlanta. The black Trans Am is only there for blocking, and so it doesn't matter how fast Bandit makes it. It depends how fast Snowman can drive it. If they use modern speeds, Atlanta to Texarkana and back in 20 hours of driving, not including stops, is only about 20 hours of driving, not including stops. Bandit running blocker doesn't prevent Snowman from getting pulled over completely, because we saw him get pulled over, but it keeps it from being too much of an issue, so the cops are going to leave Snowman behind and chase after Bandit. And we know this is true because after 28 hours, no one knows the Snowman exists, and so Smokey was not chasing Snowman at all, and so it depends how fast he can get there. It's silly that they would take the back roads instead of the interstate, even though the speed limits on the interstate were the same as they were on the back roads. The lack of intersections makes a world of a difference on that. You can average 55 all the way across on the interstate, and if you're going to speed, there's a problem that maybe you might draw the attention of state troopers and things like that. Because notice that these were all county, the county mounties, and so these were all sheriffs that were doing it. They didn't see a lot of the state police. They only saw the county and the local police officers that were generally doing it, because you had Sheriff Bradford and etc. And so maybe by going on the back roads, it kept the state police from being aware and setting up coordinated effort. So maybe that's it, especially in the westbound run, because it's night. But on the other hand, it's night. Nobody's out. And so why don't you just get on the interstate and fly? I don't understand it. So from a time perspective, there's no reason to think that they can't get to Texarkana and back in 28 hours, even back in 1977, 1978 with lower speed limits and everything like that. Just get on the interstate. Depending on what you need to do, these various factors of when does the clock start? That's an important part. The clock starts right when they make the agreement. Then you're out very quickly buying a car as fast as you can, and you're not sitting around taking your time waking Cletus and Snow up to convince him to go on the trip. You're grabbing him and you're going. But if you wait until the clock doesn't start until you leave, that's real easy at that point. Even following the speed limit, you could almost do that depending on how long it would take you. That's real easy. On the other hand, taking that all into account, it's not clear how it all works. It really isn't. We don't know when the clock started. We don't know when it ended. All these things, we can use some clues from the movie itself. And using the clues from the movie itself, I just don't get it. I really don't. It doesn't make sense. There's no reason to pick up, even if you get a timeline that seems to work, there's no reason. It has to have Carrie on the road early in the morning in a wedding dress, and there's no way for that to work either. On the other hand, they didn't drive 110 miles an hour.
You run up to Boston and bring back some clam chowder for me and my daddy?
You're on.
You're on. In 18 hours? You're still on.
Then again, going to Boston to pick up some clam chowder in 18 hours? No. That trip one way, tolls or no tolls, 16 and a half hours one way, not going to happen. Sorry. All right, so in the end, my take is they could make the trip. They really could. 28 hours from Atlanta and Texarkana and back, even giving them an hour or so, a couple hours to load up the beer. Yeah, they could do that in principle. As far as the movie goes, it's really hard to understand. And the biggest part of the timeline ends up being issue, all these things aside of when does it start and everything like that. How can they pick up Frog on the road and still make this timeline work? I just don't. I haven't been able to figure it out. So that's where I'm left with this. I'm not worried about going up to Boston to get clam chowder. We know that we can't do that. There's no way that's going to happen in 18 hours. But when I first heard that, I thought maybe it must be a 9-hour trip or 10-hour trip up and back or something like that. But no. So that's where I leave it. I don't understand it. maybe I think about it too much. Maybe that's my problem. It's still a great movie, and I still like it. When I see it on, I still stop and watch it. Jackie Gleason is still as Buford T. Justice in that movie is about one of the funniest characters that you're going to have, right up there with Ted Knight in Caddyshack. I mean, these are guys that steal the show. It's communism. That's so good. But this is still going to keep me up at night, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know. Hey, if you've got a solution to this problem, if you got it figured out, you think you understand it, put your explanation in the comments and see if we can get this sorted out. Maybe you'll help me be able to sleep better at night, and I won't waste my time overthinking Smokey and the Bandit.